I remember the quiet weight of being invisible, the way my efforts were always ignored, my voice always drowned out by the noise of other people's pride. I had learned to stay silent, to bend, to carry the burden without complaint, hoping that patience and restraint would one day earn me a sliver of recognition. But Marigold Hayes, the me who had endured, who had given more than anyone knew, finally understood. Patience had limits. Enough was enough. I could not stay in the shadows any longer, could not nod and swallow the quiet betrayals that had built up like bricks in my chest. Something had to change, and it would start with me. Those who had dismissed me, who had never truly seen me, had no idea what was coming. I stood in the dimly lit room, the glow from the monitors casting pale reflections across my face. The alerts were blinking faster than my pulse, a steady drumbeat of impending disaster. The software I had discovered a flaw in had been compromised, and if I acted too slowly, the lives of my team could be wiped out in seconds. My hands trembled on the keyboard, fingers hovering, ready to make the move that might save them, or doom us all. Every decision felt like a razor balancing on the edge of consequence. I had spent years building skills that no one ever noticed. Hours translating, decoding, calculating risks in real time, orchestrating plans that kept people alive. And yet, for all that effort, my work had always been invisible, brushed aside as if it didn't exist. The sense of being overlooked had settled in me like a weight that never lifted, shaping how I thought, how I moved, how I survived. The clock was pressing down, and the choice before me was merciless. I could trigger the alert immediately and risk exposing the identity I had guarded for so long, or I could move silently, calculating, keeping everyone safe while remaining hidden. My breath caught, a cold knot tightening in my chest, as I reminded myself that hesitation was not an option. As I traced the intrusion back through the logs, my stomach dropped. A digital signature glimmered in the metadata, my father's. I couldn't tell if it was oversight or intent, but one truth settled like ice in my veins. Every move I made from this point forward could be influenced by the very person whose recognition I had long craved. The weight of that realization settled over me, and I made a silent vow that nothing would stay the same from here on out. I can still feel the rigid order of the house in Denver, where every detail seemed designed to remind me of my place. Shoes lined up perfectly, heels flush against the wall, and beds stretched tight enough that a coin could bounce across the sheets. Meal times were set in stone, conversations were minimal, and emotions were never allowed to escape. The air carried an unspoken rule: control everything or be controlled. My father made it clear that reputation and medals were the currency that mattered most. Achievements in school, languages I labored over, hours spent sharpening my mind, all of it vanished in the shadow of his expectations. I remember one rare moment of triumph. A test returned with the highest grade. I had waited for the faintest sign, a single flicker of pride, a subtle lift of the lips, anything that might acknowledge that I existed beyond the confines of duty and discipline. There was nothing. The silence swallowed me whole. It was in those quiet, unremarkable failures of recognition that I learned the value of endurance. I learned to transform the weight of neglect into fuel, to shape resilience into something practical. Every skill I honed, every language I mastered, every calculation I performed quietly in the corner of the room was my effort to survive, to assert that I mattered. But in doing so, I became invisible in the truest sense. My efforts served a purpose only to me, rendering me a ghost in the eyes of the people I most wanted to notice me. The paradox was sharp. The very talents I cultivated to prove my worth had simultaneously rendered me unseen, a tool for the world to exploit or ignore. And yet, even then, I refused to abandon them. I carried them like weapons, ready for the day I would need them to matter when it counted. When the stakes were real, the present offered no comfort. In the Denver Command Center, the alerts were relentless, but a new danger had crept inside the system, one that traced back to software my father had approved years before. Every blink of a red warning was a reminder that the past could reach forward to imperil the present. I had to stay calm, to act as though the room and its occupants, the colleagues whose eyes now occasionally flickered with doubt, were irrelevant to my immediate task. Some of them were watching too closely, manipulating data in subtle ways to cast shadows of suspicion, a quiet conspiracy designed to undermine me. As I traced the intrusion through layers of logs and firewall histories, a chilling realization settled in. One false move, one pause too long, and a trusted teammate would be exposed to life-threatening danger. The responsibility pressed down like lead. The line between analyzing code and protecting lives blurred into one constant, punishing rhythm. Part of the risk originated from the oversight of my father's past decisions, but the rest was closer, more immediate. Those I relied on, or thought I could, were capable of turning my efforts into evidence against me. I found myself standing on a knife's edge, act quickly and decisively to protect my team while maintaining secrecy, or hesitate and risk exposure, failure, and potentially the death of someone I could not afford to lose. The weight of every choice, every microsecond, pulled tight around me. I knew that whatever I did next would define not just this mission, but the measure of my own agency in a world that had long tried to render me invisible. The holding room felt colder than any field operation I had ever been sent into. 4 gray walls closed in, the fluorescent light above me flickering just enough to keep my nerves on edge. My access had been stripped without ceremony. Screens I once moved through with ease were now locked behind permissions I no longer had. I had been labeled a potential risk, a phrase that carried more weight than any accusation spoken out loud. It pressed down on my chest harder than incoming fire ever had. I had spent my career dealing with dangers no one else could see. Now I was the danger, at least on paper. Hands inside the system had turned inward, and I could feel them tightening. Every minute I sat there, the suspicion grew heavier, more personal. Then the call came. A trusted teammate had gone down during an operation outside the wire. Injured, exposed. There was no time to argue procedure. I moved on instinct, pushing past doubt and protocol. Dust burned my throat as I dropped to my knees beside them. Blood slick on my hands, the sound of distant movement closing in. I worked fast, guiding breathing, stopping the bleeding, forcing calm into a moment that wanted to spin out of control. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my hands stayed steady. They had to. As the situation stabilized, the truth settled in. The flaw that had put us here did not come from betrayal. It came from a mistake made long ago, one that traced back to my father. No one else saw it yet. No one was ready to acknowledge it. At the same time, external forces were watching closely, tracking patterns, waiting for hesitation. And inside the building, a senior colleague was quietly reshaping data, preparing a report that would pin everything on me. I was given 24 hours to prove otherwise. 24 hours before consequences became irreversible. I returned to a temporary workstation with dried blood still on my sleeves, dust clinging to my skin. The terminals hummed as I brought them online, each login a risk I could not afford to miscalculate. I followed the trail piece by piece, pulling email headers, authentication logs, and location data, letting the system tell its story instead of forcing my own. The pattern emerged slowly, painfully clear. The digital approval tied to the compromised software carried my father's authorization, but it had been transmitted from miles away, at a time when I was deployed in the field years earlier. The timing was precise, almost cruel in its symmetry. What looked like coincidence carried devastating consequences. That single oversight had created a crack wide enough to endanger an entire team. The pressure intensified as I worked. I could feel eyes on my activity, subtle checks, delays that were not accidental. If my access was flagged, everything I had protected would unravel at once. The identity I had kept buried for so long would surface, and the fallout would reach far beyond me. Outside threats had not backed off either. Every second mattered. Every line of code felt like a countdown. In that moment, I understood why my past had shaped me the way it had. The patience, the discipline, the ability to think across languages and systems, to stay calm while everything else burned. were no longer abstract strengths. They were the difference between survival and loss. There was no retreat left to consider. Either I solved this and kept everyone standing, or the cost would be measured in lives. The holding room still carried the low hum of ventilation and the echo of footsteps passing in the corridor. I sat in front of the terminal, eyes fixed on the data I had just unraveled. Horizon echo, access logs, authentication trails. My father's digital approval threaded through it all like a fault line. Every entry felt like another brick laid between my team and survival. Sending the report under my own name would have been the simplest path. It also would have been reckless. I chose another identity, not out of fear, but out of necessity. The work demanded precision. Every keystroke had to disappear cleanly. Every packet routed in a way that left nothing to question. I moved slowly, deliberately, aware that a single anomaly could be enough for someone inside the building to tear everything apart. The risk followed me with every second. If my access patterns were flagged, if my timing slipped, the role I had protected for years would surface in front of people who were already looking for a reason to condemn me. Somewhere nearby, a senior colleague was watching, waiting to shape my work into a narrative that served their own ambition. At the same time, alerts continued to flare across the system. External actors were probing again, closer now, adjusting their approach. Each warning tightened the pressure. My team was still exposed, still vulnerable, and time was shrinking fast. I forced myself to breathe. In that moment, memories rose uninvited. Shoes aligned against a wall, beds pulled tight, meals eaten in silence. The look on my father's face when effort earned nothing but indifference. Those years had taught me control when everything inside wanted to break. That discipline steadied my hands now. There was no alternative left to consider. If I hesitated, people would die. The choice was stark, and I accepted it without ceremony. The night at Red Rock Hall unfolded beneath crystal lights and polished stone. As I crossed the gala floor in my Class A uniform, the contrast was impossible to miss. Medals caught the light on the chests of officials who had never seen what I had seen. Never carried what I carried? The sound of my steps cut through the room, sharp and deliberate, pulling attention toward me whether I wanted it or not. My father stood at the front, poised to receive an award meant to celebrate a lifetime of decisions. Confidence sat easily on him. He had no reason to imagine that I would be there, let alone that I would be the one to change the direction of the evening. I took my place and began to speak. Horizon echo. The vulnerability buried inside it. The chain of approvals that had allowed it to pass without scrutiny. I explained the mechanics with clarity, laying out how the flaw could be exploited and what that meant for the people operating under its protection. I spoke about consequences, about exposure, about the margin between safety and loss. I did not raise my voice. I did not rush. Every word landed exactly where it needed to. As I traced the oversight back to its source, I felt the shift in the room. My father's expression changed, confidence giving way to something closer to shock. The realization moved through him in real time, visible to everyone watching. I did not reveal everything. I did not need to. The role I held remained unnamed, protected by the same restraint that had guided me this far. Still, the room understood what mattered. The work I had done, the decisions I had made, and the resolve behind them could no longer be dismissed. Public scrutiny pressed in from all sides. Colleagues weighed their assumptions. My father met my eyes, and for the first time in years, there was no dismissal there. No correction, just recognition, unspoken but undeniable. In that moment, I understood something with absolute clarity. I did not need revenge. I did not need to expose every truth. Standing firm and proving what I was capable of had been enough. The old balance had shifted, and everyone in that room felt it. The noise in Red Rock Hall faded until all I could hear was my own breathing. I took the microphone and stepped fully into the light, aware of the weight in the room as every official, every senior figure, and my father focused on me. The silence pressed down hard, the kind that demands precision and punishes hesitation. I laid out the architecture of Horizon Echo piece by piece. I explained how the vulnerability could be exploited, how control layers meant to protect operations could be turned against the very people relying on them. I walked through the technical trail without rushing, grounding each point in evidence rather than accusation. My voice stayed level. My hands did not shake. This was not a confrontation fueled by anger, but a reckoning built on clarity. I made it clear what failure meant beyond screens and systems. A breach here did not end with corrupted data. It ended with teams exposed, movements predicted, and lives placed in direct danger. I spoke about timing, about how quickly a weakness could cascade into catastrophe when the wrong eyes found it. The room shifted as the implications settled in. I did not reveal what I did not have to. The role I operated in remained unnamed, protected by the same discipline that had guided me through years of quiet responsibility. Still, understanding moved through the audience. They could see the distance between assumptions and reality, between the limits they had placed on me and the scope of what I was capable of handling. My father stood motionless. The confidence he carried earlier had drained away, replaced by something fragile and unguarded. His hands trembled slightly as recognition reached him. The work he had dismissed, the abilities he had never valued, now stood in direct contrast to the honors waiting at his feet. In that moment, the hierarchy he believed in no longer applied. I felt no satisfaction in his discomfort. There was no urge to press further, no need to strip anything else away. Standing there, grounded in fact and responsibility, was enough. The authority in the room had shifted without force or spectacle. I did not seek validation. I demonstrated truth, and that was stronger than any retaliation I could have imagined. The morning after Red Rock Hall arrived quietly, without ceremony. News moved through the corridors in low voices and sealed memos. My father withdrew from the Lifetime Achievement Award without spectacle or protest. There were no statements, no public explanations, just a simple absence where his name had been. It was not humiliation. It was acknowledgement, delivered in the only language he had ever respected. The review moved quickly once the report was fully examined. My findings stood on their own. The systems analysis, the timelines, the risk assessments were confirmed line by line. Access was restored. Authority followed. What had been taken from me in suspicion was returned with intent, not as a favor, but as a correction. Those who had worked against me adjusted their posture just as quietly. The colleague who had reshaped data and whispered doubt stopped meeting my eyes. Their influence receded, contained by the same structure they had tried to manipulate. There was no confrontation, no victory speech. Positions realigned themselves naturally once the truth could no longer be bent. Most importantly, the team was protected. Measures were implemented. Exposure points were sealed. Operations stabilized. The name I worked under remained exactly where it belonged, untouched and unseen. I did not need recognition to do the work. I needed freedom to do it correctly. I watched all of this unfold with a calm that surprised even me. For years, I had believed resolution would come with words, with apologies, with some acknowledgement spoken out loud. Instead, it came through action, through choices made without discussion, through silence that finally carried meaning. My father never addressed me directly. He did not have to. By stepping aside, he said everything that mattered. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Whatever value I held no longer lived in his approval. It never truly had. What I had earned was mine to keep. I returned to my desk at the Denver Intelligence Center with a steadiness I had never felt before. The room looked the same, the screens humming softly, the familiar rhythm of controlled urgency in the air. Yet something inside me had shifted. On the edge of the desk lay the West Point ring my father once kept. For years it had symbolized expectation and distance. Now, as I slid it onto my finger, it meant something else entirely. Not inheritance, not permission, responsibility chosen freely. Briefings for the next assignment were already waiting. New variables, new risks, different terrain. I read through them with a clear head, grounded by everything that had come before. The past had sharpened my judgment, taught me restraint, taught me when to move and when to wait. I carried that forward without hesitation. What mattered now was not recognition or reconciliation. It was doing the work correctly, ethically, and with full awareness of the cost. I had learned that worth is not granted by medals or softened by apologies. It is built through action, through decisions made under pressure, through the discipline to remain calm when chaos demands otherwise. Around me, people moved with a new awareness. They understood my authority even if they did not understand its source. The name I operated under remained unspoken, protected as it always had been. That balance suited me. I had what I needed: purpose, control, and the quiet freedom that comes from knowing exactly who you are.